Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Mark Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us to stay curious. Kicking off our week today with the one and only Mr. Nick Thomas. Nick, how are you?
Good to see you, Mark.
Great to see you. I say one and only because for 35 years you've been involved with the Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex. You are the Delaware North's lead educator out there. Nick, tourism is great out there, isn't it?
It's real good. And I think I don't have the numbers to back it up, but just by boots on the ground, I think we have surpassed our pre-COVID numbers, and we are just really kicking it out there. Right now, we're averaging about between 3,700 and 4,000 people a day, so it's really cooking out there.
Wow, it certainly is. And of course, the school groups, but
Yep.
people from all over the world. You just walk in there and you hear languages behind you.
Yes, you do.
All that. And we love supporting the astronaut encounter. We being my co-producer, Marty Winkle here. Hey, Marty, he's over there checking out our Streamlabs production here today. And Marty, we really enjoy going out there and seeing the astronauts, don't we?
We do, but we also enjoy seeing Nick.
Yes, Nick and Mark Smith out there, and Steve Agard pinch hits once in a while too. But it's a lot of work, a lot of behind-the-scenes things I know goes on back there. And one thing I always pride Nick about is you see unusual photographs that you never see. Very rarely, and you go right to Houston and ask them for pictures, right, occasionally.
Well, I do a lot of research on the different websites, the NASA websites and others, and the guys bring in the majority of their flight pictures and some ones that haven't been seen in public before. So it's a lot of fun wrangling all these pictures, pulling them together and putting them into a presentation.
Just like it is today to do a presentation about, what do we have behind here on the green screen, Nick?
We have the recovery of Freedom 7 on May 5th, 1961, and being winched into that Marine Corps Sikorsky helicopter is none other than Alan B. Shepard, the first American to fly in space.
And that's what we're going to talk about today. 62 years ago, this event happened, and you all know, of course, like I had Alan Shepard on my wall as a kid since I can remember, the Mercury astronauts, and somewhere in my home I've always had the Mercury astronauts on my wall. I guarantee it. Nick, you're probably like me too, growing up with this.
Yeah, that's where it all started, the Mercury 7.
A little bit about Nick. He grew up down the road in Daytona Beach. You're a Harry Holcomb News Communications Award winner in 2017, which is a big deal. That the National Space Club bestows on journalists, and you have won the coveted, honored to have the coveted Snoopy Award on there. You've been through many incarnations at Kennedy Visitors Complex in your career, I can't imagine it being any better.
Well, it's grown so incredibly since I arrived in 1987. The complex itself with the IMAX theaters, and now from there going on to the Saturn V Center, and then we added the shuttle launch experience, and after that we brought in Atlantis. We've got the new Gateway facility out there, so the place has just grown by leaps and bounds over the past several years, along with the space program itself, the shuttle program, and then of course after shuttle we had the commercial, the SpaceX manned flights, and now we're getting ready to go back to the moon with the Artemis program. So it's been very exciting to see all this come together over such a period of time.
In 10 years since Atlantis was moved into its great hall. Can you believe that?
Seems like yesterday.
Yes, but I get chill bumps every time I look at it. I really do. It's just amazing to sit under that beautiful spaceship and all the things that the Delaware North does under there to honor it. Yeah. This weekend is going to be the Astronaut Hall of Fame of the Scholarship Foundation. We're going to induct Roy Bridges and Mark Kelly. Do you have anything to do with that, getting ready for it?
No, that's another operation over on the other side of the campus. And while they're doing that celebration, I'm usually busy with the astronauts doing the live shows and the chat withs and the autograph ops. So that'll be taken over on the other side of the campus, and I'll get a chance to watch that ceremony when I get home on YouTube.
And you've got ahead kind of a real celebrity astronaut coming on this year, a new one. Tell us about the former Canadian government official.
She's coming in for her first stint with us, Julie Payette.
Uh-huh.
She flew with Eileen Collins on the deploy of the Gamma Ray Observatory, the Compton Gamma Ray Observatory. And she served as the Governor General of Canada for quite a few years, and now she's joining our little club over at Astronaut Encounter. We're looking forward to seeing her. I've been in contact with her through the emails, and just really looking forward to her.
Oh, she's looking forward to it. She was also on one of our shuttles of May, STS-96, with 3 women aboard that.
Yeah.
And include my favorite survivor, astronaut Barry. On the Survivor show, he was on that. What's Barry's first
Dan
name?
Barry.
Dan, I thought Dan Barry, on there. Well, finally, I wanted to thank Nick for being our MC at our Shuttle Fest. We conducted very successfully in April. Thank you for doing that, Shuttle Fest 2, and you were on the panel.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah, very much.
Of course, I'm going to ask you to be part of that as we're planning actually 3 Shuttle Fests ahead of time here. On there. And also, I know Marty thanks you for being the MC for the Grumman reunion, the final Grummy reunion there.
I got to work on a panel with Jack Klausma and Charlie Mars, and I want to tell you the stories I heard that night were fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
And I understand some pretty good stories Friday night, too, before that.
Yeah. Yep.
And Jack Klausma, thank you for all you do. The gentleman is class all the way.
Yes.
He loves talking to everybody about his missions on Skylab and STS-3, and he said he's covered up this summer, 50th anniversary of Skylab,
Yep.
and so here in 2023 and 24. So, well, let's thank Delaware North also for contributing to our American Space Museum. We'll say that they're sponsoring this episode with Nick Thomas here. And Nick, I'm just going to give you the floor now, and as we kick it off with about the great Alan Shepard, a hero of you and mine for sure.
Well, once upon a time, there was a naval air cadet by the name of Alan Shepard. And here we see him when he was at Corpus Christi, when he was first a flight student. He was born, of course, in East Derry, New Hampshire. He graduated from Annapolis in 1944, was actually a member of the class of 45, but during the war, the classes were cut to 3 years instead of 4. So after his graduation, he went sea duty on board the USS Cogswell. And during his time on the Cogswell, Shepard served as the gunnery officer, and the Cogswell was involved in picket duty for both the invasion of Okinawa and the campaign in the Lingayen Gulf. And as a picket ship, the Cogswell had to face off all of these kamikazes, protect the fleet from these kamikazes. Ooh. So Shepard and his gun crews were literally besieged by hundreds of kamikazes over those 2 campaigns. And it was said that after the Okinawa campaign, Shepard went on shore and personally saw the carnage that took place on that island. And that experience changed him forever, but he never really talked about it. After his time in the war, he was accepted in Corpus Christi, Texas for flight instruction, as you see him there. And then from there, he went to Patuxent River Naval Air Station in 1950 to serve as a test pilot student. He was nearly court-martialed at Pax River for looping the Chesapeake Bridge and flat-hatting the beach there, but his commanding officers elected to look the other way, and he got past that. After his time at Pax River, he was selected to serve with VF 193, and he was actually requested by Commander James Ramage, who was also known as Jig Dog. Now they flew Banshees off the aircraft carrier. The Oriskany, that's what it was. And on one flight, Shepard and Jig Dog were flying together, and Jig Dog was overcome by oxygen starvation, and Shepard actually brought him back in for a safe landing, literally saved his life, and that's going to come in handy here as we progress with our story. After his time at sea, he was requested by Rear Admiral John Whitney to serve as an ADC, an aide to Admiral Whitney in the Pentagon. Well, that was the last thing that Shepard wanted, so he went back to Jig Dog and said, can you put in a bad word for me, please? So Jig Dog contacted the Admiral and said, yeah, Shepard's a good aviator, good officer, but He's also unpredictable. He can be insubordinate, and I don't think he'd really mesh with your operation at the Pentagon. So he got cut loose from that and actually picked up a second tour at Pax River, which was very unusual back in those days. And that is where he really came into his own as a test pilot. He went on to test the F-3H Demon, the F-8 Crusader, the F-4D Skyray, and the Grumman F-11 Tiger. Now, he down-checked 2 airplanes, the F-5D Skylancer and the F-11F. And when he down-checked the Skylancer, he wrote a 14 or 15-page long report giving all the engineering reasons why this plane was really unacceptable. But after this 14 or 15-page dissertation, his last sentence in the report was, "This is not what we want." And by God, the Navy turned down the Skylancer and went with the F-8 Crusader instead. So even when he was selected as an astronaut, he was already a power in naval aviation. His word could progress or could downcheck an airplane in for the Navy. In 1959, of course, he was selected with the first group of astronauts, the Mercury 7 astronauts, and here we see him after being selected for that role. He, of course, went on to fly the first manned space flight, a suborbital flight known as Freedom 7. And in years later, he was asked what the most important moment of his life was. He said it wasn't walking on the moon. He said it wasn't even flying Freedom 7. It was the night that Dr. Gilruth had brought all 7 astronauts together in Virginia at Langley and said, we've been watching you guys now for the past year or so and making our decisions on who's going to be first. And he cut right to it. He said, Shepard's going to fly the first flight, Grissom the second, and John Glenn will back up both. So the decision was made. And Shepard said that was the most incredible turning point in his entire life. Of course, he went on to fly that mission very successfully. A strange thing that happened, though, was NASA went into a kind of a strange public relation mode here. They decided instead of announcing Shepard's name, they were going to say there are 3 finalists, Glenn, Grissom, and Shepard, always announcing them in alphabetical order. Of course, everybody knew, all the astronauts knew who was going to be first, and so they had to put up with this charade for quite some time, up until the 2nd of May on the first launch attempt. When that attempt was scrubbed, NASA finally announced that Shepard was going to be the pilot. Now here we have a picture of the 3 of them together, and this is around the time that Life magazine, who had the rights to their personal stories, Life magazine wanted to name these 3 guys the Gold Team, and the rest of the astronauts would be called the Red Team. Well, nobody was going to put up with that. So that idea was very, very quickly shelved. But as I say, on May the 2nd, after that first unsuccessful attempt, Shepard's name was announced, and going into the next attempt on May 5th, as we know, Alan Shepard was going to be the pilot. And here we see him in the suit-up room, fully suited in that sparkling silver Mercury pressure suit that captured our imagination as kids.
And that smile in one of the most famous photos of space age there.
Smiling Al, that's right.
Yeah.
The morning started with breakfast over in Hangar S with Shepard and his backup, John Glenn. And here we see them getting ready to enjoy a good breakfast of steak and eggs over in Hangar S. After that, it was a matter of going over to the medical room, and here we see Dr. Bill Douglas, and he's giving Shepard his final medical examination. And basically, it was just like stick the mirror under his nose. If he fogs the mirror, he's going. But here we see Douglas going through that the final examination. And here again, the great Joe Schmidt helping Shepard on with that silver pressure suit, which was designed originally by B.F. Goodrich. And after that, it was a matter of going out to the launch pad.
I'm checking the watch out he has there. On his left hand there.
Oh, what you see, that's the pressure gauge for the pressure. Yeah,
okay.
that's pressure gauge, yeah.
On there.
Now, if you go to the next picture, you'll see Shepard coming out of the south door of Hangar S.
There's Gus.
And it was, there's Gus with him. And it was unusual. Shepard and Gus were the only ones who used that south door to go out to the transfer van. Everybody else used the big hangar doors on the east side of the building. But here we see Shepard coming out and getting into what the guys called the cattle car, and that's basically what it was, big 16-wheeler. And this was during one of the practice runs. Shepard is in the van. They're doing the final comm check, checking his radio system, and then I think a quick pressure check on the pressure suit before he gets out of the van and walks up to the elevator and goes up to the spacecraft level. Here he is at spacecraft level, shaking hands with Gus Grissom, and just beyond Shepard, to the left in this picture, is John Glenn. And then to the left of Glenn, somewhat in shadow, is our old friend Gunther Wendt, who was the pad leader at the time. But Shepard's about to get ready to get inside that small Mercury spacecraft. And here he is inside the spacecraft, and John Glenn, in the last note of solidarity and camaraderie with Shepard, had left a sign on the control panel that said no handball playing in this area. So that was John's way of wishing his compadre good luck. And Shepard spent several hours in that capsule, delayed by weather, and of course the famous story of he had no receptacle to urinate in, and basically had to urinate in his suit. But that's one of the
And the famous quote by him.
being a wetback. Yeah.
Yeah.
And here we see the launch of the Redstone from.
Just like this candle.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was
Fix your little problem.
There was a
and
problem
light
with a
this
pressure gauge on the Redstone, and he could see the engineers were just on the verge of saying, "Well, we better not take any chances." And Shepard gets on the circuit and he says, "Listen, I'm cooler than you are. Why don't you fix your little systems and light this candle?" And we heard that used later on in the program. We heard it used by the first crew of the Dragon vehicle, Doug
Yeah.
Hurley and Bob Benkin. Let's light this candle.
Yeah.
So those are words that live right alongside of Neil Armstrong's words on the moon and some of the great quotes running throughout American history. But here we see the vehicle being launched on top of a Redstone rocket.
And what I hear him saying right now is, the clock has started.
Yeah.
In there, and that's the clock has started for all of space flights for America. I mean, that's just amazing to think.
He's being launched on a modified modified Redstone vehicle, which was an intermediate range ballistic missile. This was a field weapon used by the Army to launch nuclear warheads to their targets. So here you had the retasking of these weapons of war now being used for exploration of space.
And I thought I'd throw this picture in.
Oh yeah, President Kennedy, his wife Jacqueline, and to the left, Vice President Lyndon Johnson, who was chairman of the Space Council, in charge of a large part of the space program, watching Shepard's launch on television. I think I see Bobby off to the far left,
Yeah,
and
Bobby
with the
Kennedy.
bow tie, it's Arthur Schlesinger. And
Right.
that might be Admiral Burke to Schlesinger, to the right of Schlesinger, I'm not sure.
And that's as good as television's got in 1961
That was
there
it.
in the
That was it.
presidential suite
Yeah,
there.
the
but,
black and white picture, and but it was a moment of high drama for everyone in this country, and I think the picture really underscores the fact that President Kennedy was just as in awe of this whole program as was the man in the street. And of course, 3 weeks after this flight, President Kennedy went to the Congress and made the proposal that we put a man on the moon before the end of the decade. So you can see the real possibilities brewing in Kennedy's mind there as to what this could lead to and what this could mean, not only for the United States, but also for the world in general. Shepard on board Freedom 7, very cramped spacecraft. You can tell just below there in the chest area and the zipper, the suit is fully pressurized. His faceplate is closed. But yeah, 15-minute flight, 115 miles up and 300 miles downrange. But enough time for Shepard to perform manual maneuvers with this vehicle in roll, yaw, and pitch. And that was something the Russians couldn't do at that time. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning of what would eventually lead to piloted flight, human piloted flight in space. So this first exercise of that reaction control system on board the Mercury capsule would eventually lead to rendezvous and docking, and eventually lead to the landing on the moon. This photograph, I'm not sure where it came from. It could have been an automatic preset camera on one of the unmanned flights. Shepard did not have the time, Shepard or Grissom did not have the time to fiddle with a camera out the window during their flights. They were solely concentrated on the systems on board the spacecraft. but this would have been a picture from one of the previous unmanned flights to give you an idea of what Shepard was seeing either in the periscope or through the porthole. Of course, he didn't have much time to look around, and when he made the comment from the periscope, what a beautiful view, he'd actually had a gray filter on the periscope and couldn't see a color picture at all, but realized that he had to say something profound for the folks back home.
And of course, one of the big tests was that the heat shields would work correctly.
Yeah.
On the reentry, they did escape the atmosphere. 115 miles, was that?
115 miles up, and even though it was a ballistic flight, you didn't get the reentry temperatures that you would on an orbital flight. You did get the G loading. I think he peaked at about 10.5 G during reentry. So that was a test not only of the heat shield, but also of the entire system and the ability of the man to withstand those forces himself. Again, here he is being winched up on board that helicopter, the capsule there in the background, and Shepard in the sling being lifted up to the helicopter, about to be taken to the USS Randolph, which was a prime recovery ship on this mission.
And another iconic photograph.
Oh yeah, on board the Randolph, and he had gone back. He exited the helicopter and he'd gone back to the capsule to recover his helmet, and then from here he went downstairs for the medical checks and the phone call from President Kennedy. Here he is getting out of his suit below decks, very happy look on his face, realizing what he's just accomplished. And even though it paled in comparison to the flight of the Vostok 1 with Yuri Gagarin, who made an orbit of the Earth, Shepard realized that this was going to be only the first step in a very long voyage and a very long race for the United States, and a race that he was always convinced the United States would win.
Well, we're enjoying our conversation with Nick Thomas about our hero, Mr. Alan Shepard. Marty, we've got a question.
Yeah, question from Carlton Bailey. Any idea why a gray filter? Was it for eye safety?
Yeah, because when he was on the pad, his periscope was deployed, and the sun came up and got in that periscope and flashed brightly in his eyes. So he slapped that filter into place to guard himself from that. And later, I think before the launch, he went to remove that filter, but he saw his hand come very close to the abort handle. He said, hell, I'll just look at a gray world. I'm not going to take a chance of messing this up. So he left that gray filter on. That's why it was in place when he went to peak apogee.
And I believe that periscope was between their legs, right?
The scope was right in the center of the console and went down a pedestal between their legs, and the periscope extended out the other side.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're gonna see some more history here of 62 years ago, May 5th, 1961, when America entered the space race officially. It was a big deal that Shepard went to President Kennedy, presented him a medal there. Here
they are at GBI, Grand Bahama Island, and Shepard's come off that plane, which came off the Randolph, and he's being greeted there by Gus Grissom. And you can see by his posture, he is one happy test pilot.
Yeah. Nick, you rattled off some of the airplanes that he tested and so forth, and I was wondering, the bravery of test flying a plane that someone's just built at Grumman and no one's ever flown before, or with an engine that's never flown before.
Yeah.
I mean, that's some bravery, and the tender, loving care that this Mercury capsule got, with not dozens but hundreds of people paying attention to it. Do you think Shepard felt pretty more confident in the Mercury capsule than he did maybe one of those test warplanes?
He approached it the same way as he approached flying all these other airplanes. He said, as test pilot, you continually fly bigger and better and faster and farther and higher, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, you're expanding what they call the boundary of the envelope being the curve where thou shalt not pass if you're flying an airplane. And I think all the astronauts looked at it as sort of being a natural extension of what they'd already been doing, flying strange-looking aircraft and testing these things for the first time. So it's a natural step, a natural progression in a test pilot's career.
And so, yeah, he's going to space after the ultimate thing.
Absolutely.
I just sense he had good confidence in how this was built by McDonnell, St. Louis and all. And
He had high confidence, but at the same time, he was asked years later, what was your first thought when you're sitting out there on the launch pad? And he said the hatch was put in place and locked in place, and his first thought was, well, Buster, you volunteered for this thing.
yeah, the human element. Here you are. So now let's see what happens and go for the ride. Well, here he is again. Marty, you're going to make that big for me. Thank you, buddy.
He's at GBI with Deke Slayton on the left in this picture and Gus Grissom to the right. And of course, I mean, that picture just says it all.
Yeah.
Not only for America's first step in manned spaceflight, but for the joy and for the excitement that comes only to engineering test pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And the three of them, having lived that role, they're all sharing in it right there.
The exhilaration of that.
Yeah.
Now, I have not been on a cruise ship tour, but you may have, Nick. At the Grand Bahama Islands are a great. They celebrate these missions there, don't they?
I believe so. I haven't been to GBI.
Okay.
I've been down to the Abacos, but I haven't been to GBI.
No, my brother sent me the T-shirts. So yes.
Cool.
So, but no, they have quite an elaborate situation there for tourists there to brag about that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Not only the two Grissoms followed, but Glenn landed there too in the Grand Bahama. Grand Turk is what we're trying to say there. Well, there was more to this man than met the eye when it comes to leadership.
Now, here we are in mission control for the flight of MA9 with Gordon Cooper. And Alan Shepard was Cooper's backup for this flight. And the word was that Shepard followed very closely on Cooper's heels. He was ready to step in if he had to. And I think some of that might be reflected here in that picture, or Cooper's already up and it's too late. But what came from this picture was the fact that after Cooper's flight, MA9, Shepard began to lobby for another Mercury flight, Mercury Atlas 10. And the idea of MA10 would be to stay up there for as long as the systems would last, an open-ended mission. So Shepard started to lobby all the officials in NASA, and as it turned out, Bob Gilruth and Walt Williams were for it, but Mr. Webb was not. So Mr. Webb was basically the final authority in NASA, and so when he gave Shepard the no, Shepard said, well, Mr. Webb, do you mind if I take this recommendation to the president? And Webb said, oh, it's fine. He said, if you'll promise me that you will tell the president that my recommendation is no. And Shepard said, no problem. So a few weeks later at a White House reception, Shepard was able to corner President Kennedy and tell him about this plan and the idea he had for MA-10. And after giving the explanation, Kennedy listened, and finally he said, well, what's Mr. Webb's view? And Shepard said, well, Mr. Webb's against it. And Kennedy said, well, I think we'll go with Mr. Webb's opinion, and walked away, and that was it. So basically, I think Kennedy had been warned by Webb that this was coming, and they both decided to let Commander Shepard know that that was going to be the end of Project Mercury, and we're going to press on with Project Gemini. Now, in 1963, Shepard was named to the first Gemini mission with Tom Stafford. The assignment was not officially made, it was not publicly made, and as it turned out, Shepard quickly suffered the first manifestations of Meniere's disease, the imbalance, the vomiting, and disorientation. And so Shepard was grounded from spaceflight and then also grounded from flying T-38s by himself, which was a bitter pill to swallow. So as Deke Slayton was made the Director of Flight Crew Operations, Alan inherited his spot as Chief of the Astronaut Office. And you'll see in the next picture in Mission Control, this was sometime around Gemini 10 or Gemini 11, I believe. And there you see Pete Conrad off to the right, and also visiting is John Glenn, who's going to be running for the Senate in the near future after this picture. But Shepard was the chief astronaut. He watched over all the astronauts. Didn't put up with a lot of frivolity and so forth from them, because let's face it, Shepard knew all the tricks by now, and so nobody was going to get one over on him. So he kept pretty close rein on these astronauts who were getting ready to fly these Gemini and later on Apollo missions. And here you see him in the trailer over at Pad 16 with Frank Borman just before Gemini 7, and it's like, the Godfather is always there, always watching, always listening, and always ready to give some advice, solicited or not. But there in that picture, you see two of the stronger personalities in the astronaut office, Al Shepard and Frank Borman, and I can imagine they would match each other volt for volt for self-confidence and for discipline. A couple of remarkable guys there.
You're honoring Gemini 7 today with your wardrobe today.
Now, in 1968, Tom Stafford went to Al and told him about a Dr. William House in Los Angeles who had come up with a possible cure or treatment for Meniere's disease. So Shepard went to visit Dr. House, and the doctor told him, he said, it's going to come out one of two ways. You're either going to be cured or you're going to lose all hearing in that ear. And Shepard said, let's roll the dice. So he checked in May of 1968. He checked in under the name of Victor Poulis. Poulis, Poulis. And then he took the operation in secret. And eventually he was restored to full flight status in May of 1969. And here you see him back in the front seat of a T-38 jet aircraft where he was always meant to be. And you can imagine what a triumph that was to make it back to flight status. But there was still one more leap that he wanted to make. Now, when the flight assignments were being made for the lunar landing missions, Shepard requested to be put on the command of Apollo 13. Now, on that mission, he would have flown with Stuart Roosa. And originally, Shepard wanted Jim McDivitt for his lunar module pilot. But by this time, McDivitt had already accepted a promotion to the Apollo program manager. And so instead, Shepard got Edgar Mitchell, who was also very, very good at the lunar module systems. But when the guys looked around, they started seeing Shepard attending all these Apollo briefings and getting more simulator time. Here you see him at the lunar landing training vehicle, which was a real bear to handle. But all the lunar landing commanders said that was the greatest training you could have got was at LLTV. And of course, it did crash twice during its history. Once with one of the research pilots, and then another time with Neil Armstrong. So it was not an easy thing to fly, but if you could master the LLTV, you were going to do just fine on board the lunar module. And so eventually, Washington, D.C. turned down Slayton's request for Shepard to head up Apollo 13. They decided he needed more training, so instead they gave him 14 and switched the 14 crew back to 13, Jim Lovell, Ken Mattingly, and Fred Hayes, yeah. So here we see Al in the suit-up room for Apollo 14, and I think that picture just really says it all. It is a moment of triumph for him. And I had a chance to talk to Charlie Mars about this particular time in history. And Charlie said when Al came on board, he was expecting to get a real ration of stuff from this guy because he was known to be pretty tough and pretty demanding and quite uncompromising. But Charlie said he was the nicest guy in the world. He was easygoing. He was easy to work with. He simply saw himself as another member of the Apollo team. He worked hard to qualify for this position, and he certainly wasn't going to ruin it by overstepping his boundaries, if you will, or perhaps going as far as, say, Wally Schirra did, and that kind of left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. But Al was there. Big Al was back. He was the commander of Apollo 14, and he was more than ready to land on the moon. Here we see his vehicle out at Launch Pad 39A, at beautiful Saturn V moon rocket. And it's hard to find a picture of a Saturn V because they're all beautiful. But I found this one particularly, I think haunting is a good word to use. It's just a beautiful backlit like that. And it's just a beautiful image of the vehicle that's going to carry America's first man into space, carry him all the way to the moon.
And there he is.
And so he did. There he was on the lunar surface in the Fra area. And I'd like to point out that suit of his, which is now in the hall of the Apollo Saturn V Center in the vault that we have there. And you can see that suit, and you can see all that moon dust that was worn into the knees and into the shins, and realize that that was the suit that Al Shepard wore on the moon. We also have his command module, Kitty Hawk, from that mission on display.
Let's show that.
Here we see Al and Ed Mitchell in the suit-up room getting ready for the mission. And as I say, Ed Mitchell being a perfect choice for the lunar module pilot on that flight, particularly when you consider the problems that they ran into on powered descent, where they had to basically work around the computer, basically lied to the computer so it would not initiate an abort.
Yeah.
And that was very, very good hands, as I say in football, good hands on part of Ed Mitchell. And then as they got closer to the surface, they didn't have the landing radar. And finally, the ground recommended they simply cycle the landing radar breaker, which they did, and they got the radar back, and they came in for a landing on Fra Mauro. And as you can see here, as Alan Shepard said, we landed on a slope, but otherwise we're in good shape. We're right on the landing site. And I believe that it's been documented that Apollo 14 came the closest to its landing point than any other lunar landing mission,
I've read that too.
including Apollo 12.
Yeah, within like 100 feet of the bullseye.
Less
and
than
Apollo
that,
12's on less than that, maybe 50 feet. But that is a fascinating watch on YouTube. The Apollo 14 landing. They had to recircuit the entire 64K Desky computer.
Well, they had to go do a workaround condition because there was a piece of solder that was bouncing around, occasionally tripping that abort signal. And if the solder bounced and tripped it during descent, it would immediately stage the spacecraft, and the guys would be back on their way up to lunar orbit. So the folks at MIT, Don Iles, I believe was the computer engineer's name. Don Iles came up with the workaround to avoid that problem, but it had to be done on kind of a split-second basis. There were 3 steps that had to be taken in very, very close order, and I believe all told, Al and Ed had only 30 seconds to get this all together and into the computer and lodged in there to press on with the landing, and they did it. And you listen to those voices on YouTube, and they don't break a sweat.
No, they're so cool. It's just and then Al's so happy he sees the landing site and they're just the chatters. It's really a good landing chatter on that.
The words that stand out in my mind from Apollo 14 was when Al first stepped on the surface and Bruce McCandless was a Capcom, and Bruce said, "Not bad for an old man." And Al said, "Okay, you're right. Al is on the surface and it's been a long way, but we're here."
We're here.
And
how old was he?
He was 47.
47.
He's the oldest man to walk on the moon so far. Now, Reed Weissman, our commander for Artemis II, he's 47. So we might see that particular age range come back to our lunar flights in the Artemis program.
Yeah, I think 2 of them will be 48 maybe when they do that.
But at the time, they were calling Al the George Blanda of the space program.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And there's a big gotcha we've talked about with the patch and with the Roadrunner beating Kylie Wiley Coyote. I actually have it over here there. That's a famous patch that many of you have all seen.
And there were several of them left in the spacecraft by the backup crew. So every time the guys opened up a locker, one of these patches would come floating out. And Al said, "We want to thank the backup crew for supplying us with their patches."
Marty's lunar module there on the surface there, and that was quite a mission. And you got a question, Marty? Yeah.
Yeah, a question from Gary Gerald. What role did Shepard have with NASA after Apollo 14?
After Apollo 14, Al went back to the chief of the astronaut office and stayed there for a few years, and then eventually retired from NASA and from the Navy. But he went back to running the office after he came back from 14. And Tom Stafford had been holding the door for him, had held that office while he was on 14. So when Al came back, Tom was assigned, or perhaps assigned himself, to command the ASTP mission.
Why wasn't you said Stafford was considered for GT3?
Yeah.
And of course he didn't fly until
with Wally Schirra.
Yeah.
It was in those days the commander's advice was solicited as to who he wanted to fly with. And in fact, originally when Gus got Gemini 3, they were going to pair him, Deke was going to pair him with Frank Borman. So Frank got a call from Gus, said, "Come on over to the house, let's have dinner, let's talk." So they did. And then the next day, Frank got back to the office and found out he was off the crew. And he said, to this day, he doesn't know what he said or what he did, but he didn't mesh for some reason with Gus, and Gus had eventually selected John Young. Now, there was one opinion put forward by several people that said that the egos of Grissom and Borman could not fit into a single Gemini spacecraft. And that's not to say they were big-headed, but it's to say they were strong-willed, and they knew what was right and what they considered was right. And if you got these two guys into a head-to-head, nobody was going to give way. So he was able to pick up with John Young, who perfectly balanced him personality-wise. I mean, Gus was pretty much the hard-headed engineer and test pilot, while John was the easygoing Navy test pilot. You can almost see a similarity between Grissom and Young and Borman and Lovell, because Lovell served the same purpose. He kind of helped maintain an even strain, and that was those were both very good pairings. Those were both excellent pairings of two crewmen on a single mission.
The dynamics of these men, is very interesting. As you've gotten to personally know them after their careers, the pieces kind of fit together for you as you relay them here.
It's interesting. On two occasions, I've been told that we were going to be joined by certain astronauts, two different astronauts, and other astronauts who have heard of those people said, "Oh, be careful, prickly nature, prickly personality, so forth." Well, those people would come through the office, and they were just as nice as they could be. They loved talking to the people. They loved interacting with the kids, and they loved signing autographs. So the other astronauts would come back and say, "Well, how was it with so-and-so?" I said, "Hey, it was great. We had a blast. We had a wonderful time." They said, "Really?" I said, "Look at it this way. They are now out from under that very heavily competitive world of being in the astronaut office. And some people in a competitive world will feel the need to basically play offense, let's say, and probably come across as being a little prickly. But once they're out of that environment, it's like, I can breathe again." And those two folks who came through our office, I had a great time with them. Yeah.
Well, Nick, I think that has a lot to do with your personality too, and how you handle these people. But you're right; you can be warned about people, and they're completely different.
You never judge a person on somebody else's hearsay. I mean, you've got to learn the person for yourself and just go with it.
Well, that's I say a lot of it's Nick Thomas and how you deal with people in a class way, and we enjoy. All that you do out there, it's very serious a lot of times there. You got to get these astronauts to point A to B. Yeah. They got a timeline. They are when they hit the property, they're probably 8 in the morning till they leave at 6 o'clock at night. You got them doing something.
Yeah, we go no more than, with one exception, no more than 15 minutes between events.
Wow! So
you basically got time to get back to the office, catch your breath, recage your gyros, and then go on to the next assignment.
Well, we're enjoying this conversation with Nick Thomas. Marty, we have any comments there from our Stay Curious viewers out there, usual wonderful listeners today?
Yeah, quite a few comments on Nick's knowledge and how the guests love him.
No, well, that's like I said, a lot of it has to do with how he just treats people the way you want to be treated.
I wanted to bring Marty in on this. Marty, did you work on the 14 LEM, and do you have any stories about it?
Yes, I worked on 14 LEM, but Nick, they all seem to be the same in my mind.
One just rolled into the next, didn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty quick there. Well, we've enjoyed this. I picked out some bonus pictures to share with Nick Terry from our archives. Of course, we got to talk about the beautiful spacecraft there.
Kitty Hawk. Kitty Hawk is now in our Apollo Saturn V Center. Just a beautiful spacecraft.
Doors open. You get pretty close to it.
Look through the hatch, and you can see just how small those quarters were. But remembering that those quarters were larger when you were in zero gravity, because you could move around in so many places and find yourself a nice place to settle into.
The great man, the iconic photograph that they kind of took this, when you go to the Astronaut Hall of Fame, sponsored by Boeing, all right, this will just blow your mind to see all of our astronaut heroes in these beautiful lucite backlit, but there is Alan Shepard in the middle of the whole
My
thing.
grandniece, Catherine, came out to the visitor center one time, and she got one of the orange shuttle suits and the helmet and so forth. And she had a picture of herself taken next to the statue of Al Shepard here. She stood next to the statue in her spacesuit with her helmet under her arm, and she sent it to me, and in gold, she autographed it. She said, "From Commander Katie."
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Marty, what's that say underneath him? It says something of space.
Let's say spirit. Can't read it. Spirit something.
Yeah, I forget what they put under there. He's the epitome of space, is what's standing there. And of course, we love how this is displayed there. It's just part of the Hall of Fame there. But
Now, I went to his monument over at the Museum of Naval Aviation over in Pensacola, and they have plaques for all the award winners there, the members of their Hall of Fame. And Alan Shepard's plaque, all the plaques are lit by an individual light, individual bulb.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason or another, the light on Shepard's plaque is just a little bit brighter than all the others. Now, there's two reasons. There's two possible reasons for that. Number one, divine intervention.
Yeah.
Or number two, before he passed, Admiral Shepard said, "Okay, you guys, if these guys get 5-volt battery, 5 volts, I get 10 volts."
Well, it's just a spectacular look there. Of course, he attained the rank of Admiral.
Admiral Shepard
there.
Yeah.
And they always look good when they're dressed up, for sure, in there. And that's kind of lost in the new generations there. Time magazine used to be the big deal of being on the cover, the Time Person of the Year, or being on the cover of Time magazine. And
Well, back in those days, people were put on that cover that deserved to be put on that cover. They were people of solid accomplishment. Not so much anymore.
yeah, I exactly. Of course, a U.S. stamp honoring Shepard as the first American in space. I kind of wish they'd put the moon in the background or something, because him being the only Mercury astronaut to walk on the moon. But still have some of those stamps laying around. And his daughter.
Yeah.
There I am with, hey, Mark Usiak is going to be in town for the Scholarship Foundation event. But what a classy lady his Laura Shepard Churchley is.
And a fellow space traveler now.
Absolutely.
She's flown essentially the same
Repeated
profile as her father
father's
did.
flight.
And I can't think of a better person
3 years
to
ago in
receive
May, I
that
think.
honor. Yeah, absolutely. It was like Robin Olds, the great World War II and Vietnam ace. They took his daughter Christina up for a flight in an F-4 Phantom, and so we've done the same thing here with Laura Shepard. And as I say, you couldn't have selected a better person to receive that honor.
Right, and she visited our museum. Couldn't be on the show, but that was about a year and a half ago. She went up with Michael Strahan, the football player and TV personality now. But hope you all enjoying today's show. Why don't you read off a couple names of people watching today, Nick?
Well, see, on board we've got Doug Forrest, Bill Whiting, Ophelia Sautrell, Tom Usiak, Gary Gerald, Dave Strange, Carlton Bailey, Tammy McClude, yeah, you can get that last name for me. Miller, okay. Hazel Banks, Mac77, Robert Duncombe, and why don't you go ahead and take the rest, Mark?
Deborah Johnson's watching. Tom Celentano, I know you bought something on our auction that was very successful over the weekend. Daniel DeYoung's our pilot for Spirit Airlines. He was out and watched the launch of that Falcon, or the big...
the Falcon Heavy.
Yeah. No, the Super Booster.
Oh, the
Texas,
super ship, yeah.
Carol Kavanaugh, thank you for watching.
Carol Kavanaugh, my old friend from NASA, and the woman who got me started in working with astronauts and astronaut families. She is a warm, wonderful memory in my heart. And Carol, I hope you're doing well, and God bless you.
That's right. And you'll have to join us. She might be at the Old Timers Luncheon Wednesday, where some of them get together there. I'll tell you about that later.
We call them alumnus.
Alumnus,
We
yeah,
don't
not
call
old
them
timers.
old-timers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
You and I are too close.
Alumnus, yeah.
You and I are too close to that title.
We
so
are. I
too
like
respectful.
alumnus there, Nick.
Yeah.
Keith Sewell's traveling and living the dream. out there. Kurt Mason
Kurt
is
Mason, right.
your
He's
fellow
on the shop.
communicator.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Out
And
there.
Pam Shivik is an amateur astronomy solar system ambassador, a friend of mine, and a Buckeye from Lorain, Ohio. Doug Forrest, thank you.
And very quickly, I'd like to say hello to some of my friends out there, including Terry Wilcott, Bob Springer, Guy Gardner, and any of the other shuttle astronauts who are out there listening, and also to my wife Laura and all my friends and family in Daytona Beach.
Yeah, well, thank you all for watching. Bob Springer, hope you're doing well. He's been a great help to our museum over the years.
Great guy. Great
and
guy.
a great guy. Yes,
Great
indeed.
stories about flying out of Chulai.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I have to tell some of those.
Yeah.
But I wanted to the guy cleaning up. We love that the county keeps our Space View Park, and there's our Mercury monument there. That of course there is looking down on it, and the handprints of Alan Shepard. They're the only place in the world you can put your handprints. And Nick knows I get all emotional about this. Is a one-of-a-kind place in the world, like the Taj Mahal or the pyramids. There's Alan Shepard's handprints over at the Apollo monument there, and I got to brag that we got about the same hand size there, Nick. Some of them they're really small hands, but he's I'm an average Joe, I consider, and there's my handprints and the great Alan Shepard, and that thrills me to do it every time. And just to look at him there, just what a great choice to lead America to space, I think.
We have been very fortunate throughout history that the right people have come forward at the right place and at the right time. People like Charles Lindbergh, Alan Shepard, John Glenn, Eileen Collins, all these people, Neil Armstrong, Wally Schirra, all these people who come forward at the right time in our history and when we really need them the most. Shepard twice, once when we selected that first American to fly in space, and secondly, the man who was going to command the mission that followed Apollo 13. Now, basically, Shepard had the weight of the whole space program on his shoulders for Apollo 14.
You can't underestimate that.
Because he really had to help the program recover from that terrible accident on 13, where luckily we did not lose anybody, but still NASA had a lot to prove, and one of the most important decisions they made in that process was selecting Alan B. Shepard. Now, of course, he was selected before the accident, needless to say, but this is why I say this country is fortunate at those times when the right people are brought forward at the right time. We don't always know it when they're first selected, but as circumstances work out, they turn out to be just the right person we needed.
That's right, and our recovery from tragedies has all these great people behind them that did their job well and did it for our country, and it's just to look back and live these days, as a kid like I did, and where we are today, it's just amazing. So, Nick, thank you very much for a wonderful, informative program as usual. I know you'll be cooking up something in June for us as we enjoy your monthly appearance here on Stay Curious. It's a way that we reach out and the way that we can preserve the birth of the American space age here in its delivery room, Brevard County. And we love the stories that all of our national treasures like Marty, a shuttle worker, do, and people like Nick that are keep the memory alive all these years. So you have a great week, my friend, out there, and busy time at the Space Center as usual. Maybe you'll catch a little breath when it's in June, but then it's 90 degrees for the next 3 months, and we're going, oh no, hurricanes.
It's just Florida.
It is great.
It's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. It's just Florida.
Marty, anything to take care of on our Streamlabs program that you so excellently did today?
Well, Nick, you got an invite from Carol Kavanaugh to join them for lunch Wednesday.
Wednesday,
Florida Seafood.
Where's that, out at the complex?
No, it's at on Cocoa Beach, right there over the 520.
Oh, okay.
To the right there. There's two seafood places there. We'll reserve a spot for you there.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 more people at the right place at the right time. Amelia Earhart and Sally Ride.
Yeah, absolutely right.
There you go.
Again, just an example of how this nation is blessed in those circumstances. It's really remarkable.
People rise to the occasion when given, and the lesson of that is from all the astronauts. I think one of the threads of all the astronauts I met is be ready
Yeah.
when you're called
You bet.
to work.
You
Okay.
bet, yeah.
You don't know look, did Tom Stafford know he was going to go to space, twice in what, a 6-month period? He was a backup and
Right.
he was ready. And when you're called, even the all of our engineer people that we've talked to, Marty, say, I got to be ready when my number's called.
Well, there's the old story when Gordon Cooper misbehaved out on the Cape with an F-102, and Walt Williams called Alan Shepard, who was backup, and Walt said, "Shepard, is your suit ready?" And Shepard said, "My suit's all ready." So, advice to anyone out there: keep your suit ready.
That's right. Whether you want to be an astronaut or in business,
Anything, yeah.
be ready for that next thing. So, well, thank you everybody for a wonderful day today. We're going to have a special guest Thursday. We're going to have Marie Fullerton here
Okay,
to talk some
photos.
stories about being an astronaut's wife. Mark Usiak and Tom Usiak are personal friends of her through the Space Fest out there in Arizona that the Poor family did. So we're looking forward to Marie Fullerton. You've met her a few times, I'd say, or
I
have
think
you?
once, I think.
Okay. Of course, her husband, Gordon Fullerton, was STS-3, but he was on those alt missions. I love the approach and landing tests.
And a hell of a test pilot.
Was he?
Yeah.
Was he? So that's going to be Thursday. Tomorrow we're going to get into the shuttles of May. 10 beautiful shuttles flown in the month of May. And Wednesday we're going to talk about, Nick, 3 of the 6 Mercury spaceflight missions were in the month of May.
How about that?
Did you ever think of it that
How
way?
about
And of course, basically 2 years apart. We also had the Skylab laboratory was launched in May, and then a week later or 10 days later was the first crew to go up. And Apollo 10 is a May crew that we're going to be talking about tomorrow on Stay Curious. So all kinds of space history that we love, and we're reserving the Fridays for future Fridays as we look to what the Rocket Renaissance companies are doing, all the way to entertain you on Stay Curious. So until we get going again tomorrow, I'm Mark Marquette saying I can't wait to see you in our museum to bridge the space between us.